This is Including You, the new series from Lead at Any Level. Including You features stories from chief diversity officers and other executives who are creating inclusive cultures in their organizations. Our goal is to show what's working in companies just like yours, to give you the tools you need to keep pushing for progress in your own workplace. We want to create belonging and opportunity for everyone, including you. And now here's your host, Amy C. Waninger.
Welcome back to Including You. I'm your host, Amy C. Waninger, the Inclusion Catalyst. My guest today is Sharea Farmer. She's the CEO of RS Consulting and Wellness Center, where she helps leaders take a trauma-focused approach to improve employee wellness. RS Counseling and Wellness Center is based in New Jersey. Sharea, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you, and I'm excited for our listeners to learn a little bit more about what you do. When I read wellness, counseling, and consulting all together, I have to admit I get a little confused. Can you explain to folks what your background is and what the work is that you do?
Absolutely. So I always tell people when I'm introducing myself, my profession is social work. My background is in therapy, and my passion is consulting work. And so what I do is I incorporate all of those areas of my professional background with my personal experience, as well as my professional experience related to being a Black identified woman. And so what that looks like for me is racial equity and with a trauma informed lens when I'm doing consulting. What it looks like for me as a therapist is that I am a certified racial trauma therapist. And what it looks like as a social worker is social justice and activism, right? So making sure that I incorporate my full identity into all of my work has been a part of what has developed RS Counseling and Wellness Center. I have a little bit of background, but it always focuses or centers on where my experience, both as a professional, but as a human, kind of intertwined.
Thank you for that explanation. That makes it so much clearer. Can you tell me a little bit about what are your clients looking for when they bring you in to do work with them? Racial equity is such an omnipresent problem, and it's so deep and it's so complex. What is it that they're hoping to do, and what's the problem statement that they bring to you?
A lot of times the problem are twofold. They're community and employee. And so what people get when they work with me is specifically a trauma-informed lens with racial equity that takes into account the community and client impact related to the organizations that I'm serving. For example, one organization is a city government organization, and that's massive throughout the city because it's a large city. And one of the things we did was we assessed the actual service that they're providing to Black and Brown specifically in the community areas around substance use. And so really being able to determine how it impacts that population that they serve when they don't have a reflective staff, when they don't have the skills or training related to that population of service. And so we do the assessment, and then we also do what is considered an internal staff assessment around satisfaction of work and satisfaction connection to community. And we put those things together and we create a plan of action that might incorporate training. It might incorporate actual specific training to the populations that they're serving around substance use, around mental health, around being unsheltered. It can be a number of things, but then we also make those same populations specific to the historical impacts, such as racism in the war on drugs, such as racism and navigating systems of employment or systems of homelessness. So we take that and we take a lens that says, we have our population we're servicing, but what are you missing that is specific to the needs of the Black and Brown community that are impacted by that area? So that's just one example, but we also do that for what is considered the child service for one of our cities that we work for, where we actually go in and think about how are you blind screening versus actually going in and judging communities of color different than you might be a community that is considered the norm of society, right? And so things like blind screening, doing assessments, hiring with panels that create more reflective staff. We create they come with the problem of what is the racial equity, and we come with a full holistic approach to the internal and external impact on your community that you're serving.
I would imagine that your engagements and your solutions are very long term, because what you're talking about is not just systemic change, which takes time,
Mhm.
but also changing culture, which takes time, and also changing people and their beliefs and their experiences and their attitudes, which
Absolutely.
takes time. But then there's another component of this where even as you're doing all of that internal work, you're also at the same time having to build new levels of trust with a community
Yes.
that has been, for very good reasons, untrusting in the past. Can you talk a little bit about how you get all of those pieces to work together at the same time?
I do believe in areas of expertise when it comes to the types of consultants that I hire. And after I do what is considered a community needs assessment and then an employee internal assessment, based off of the plan that we come up with, we really literally have a 6 month to 18-month plan that is usually developed with the expectation that there might even be a continuation after that 18 months. And literally, I attach objectives and goals to each of those months related to the area of expertise and relationship building and trust rebuilding and trainings and supports that you'll need for each. And sometimes within our organization we have the capacity, but I also believe that this is where in my idea of being a good consultant is that you also know your areas that need to be responsible by someone else. And for us, we make sure that the plan, the assessment includes all of the realistic steps with all of those areas because it is long term. So I always say I don't know how to do touch points. Like I can't come in and do one training and then, because normally what that does is it lights a fire that you're not going to be able to complete if you bring me in. And so what I tell people at the beginning is that if you date me, you marry me. Right. Like, and so what that looks like is a long, and most of my clients, even right now, are active for me from like the young. I do have a brand new client who's getting ready to start work, but most of them are either 18 months, 2 years, and now going on 3 because they're a city government, right? And so those commitments are told to you very early on, and then I map it out after an assessment. And then we also do concrete assessments along those. Now, this is where the touch points come. We do touch points to remind us of what our objectives is, or if we need to do something different because it's not working. And so they are long term. And I think for me, that works best because I am a therapist, because I'm a social worker. If we plan on making real concrete change, it requires us to put the investment and the time in. And I'm willing to do that, which is also why I keep my clients under 5 at a time. And it's very important for me to make sure that I get the right experts to do the right task. Because although I'm a racial equity, when I'm doing some inclusion work, I'm very clear that I'm not the person, but I have resources that allow me to also give opportunities to oppressed populations that may not normally get the consultant work or get through the door to even get the consultant work, because that's an important part of even my commitment to me opening up or doing that consulting work.
I think what you said just then is so important, right? There are so many practitioners in this space that have very specific expertise, but don't always have very specific opportunity.
Absolutely.
And building equity and opportunity into the work that you're doing to create equity and opportunity is truly walking the walk in this
Mhm.
work. And I commend you for that. It is hard
Absolutely.
to get access, to find the right people, to find the right work, to match the right work. And a lot of times, folks that are looking for help don't know exactly what they need.
Yes.
They'll put out a request for proposals that says, we need diversity training. And in their mind, that's $10,000 over the course of a year, and they're going to meet all of their objectives. And the folks presenting back are saying, no, that's really the $250,000 over 3 years,
Absolutely.
and it's going to
Mhm.
be, very involved. And so it's much different. Usually there's a mismatch of expectations, but also of access for folks. So I think it's interesting that you're living it while you're trying to fix it. And I commend you for doing
Thank
both at the same time.
you.
When you work with these largely municipalities and you're doing this work over 18, 24 months, what are some of your benchmarks like along the way that like we're on track, we're not on track. We need to do some course correction here.
There's a number of things. I always say resistance is part of the work. And so normally what I expect 6 months in is around the resistance that we need to do awareness, education, and purpose driven around like what we're doing and why it may take so long. And so though that benchmark might even be introduced at that 6 months where it's like this resistance is normal as a part of any trauma or experience of harm. In order for us to really fix it, we have to acknowledge it and deal with it. And so there's a 6 months where it's really just creating the foundation of the work and being honest about the work being difficult again, because that's our first time. We've said it at the beginning, but we're saying it again. And then normally what that looks like is around the 12-month mark, doing a baseline assessment of what we've done with our objectives. And so depending on what we created as an objective, we had a year marker. And those year markers can look like, for example, using to stick with the same example, a year marker was the successful introduction of a racial equity and DEI training for all staff, both passive, which can be, and then also in person. And so that may be an example, but on the same token, we're in preparation to doing the historical background of that impacts the city specific of the war on drugs, and how even to this day, the politics that play into it as a city government and how it impacts you differently than say even a nonprofit. And so we do benchmarks that are related to the objectives, that then we make it very specific to your area of service. And then our final, I think, way out or on the way out the door is that we acknowledge that the work is ongoing. And because we are working with systems that have been created years in advance, we also need to realize that times change and we need to do evaluations at different touch points in different areas related to what you struggled in. And so if you struggled in hiring, then we may do a very specific assessment in 12 months after we've left to make sure you've maintained everything and done all the things that you're supposed to do. And then when it comes to our agency, we also do employee wellness. So I am a therapist. And so attached to most of our services are ongoing relationships with us that create an EAP style that is very specific to your population of service, but also your employee's identity. And so we have affinity groups that we literally with older clients that are no longer considered our active clients, we still run their affinity groups from 2019 till now. And so that might be identity specific when it comes to different resource groups. And so we have Black affinity groups, we have LGBTQ plus affinity groups, we have affinity groups that represent what the staff or clients needed at the organizations. And then we do an assessment every 12 months with them.
That seems to me an antidote to some of the aggregated data that doesn't always fit everyone in the organization. When organizations say we surveyed everybody and 80% of our people are happy, and so we feel like that's pretty good against benchmarks, not realizing that the 20% that they're leaving out are the 20% that are marginalized in the first place.
Absolutely.
And so I would think it would also help with their retention of employees over time, because they're getting specific interventions and specific insights into those populations as they go. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think what came to mind and I'll use the example of the affinity groups. For one organization, affinity groups work really well. For another organization, it just wasn't a fit for what they need. And what we created was vicarious trauma groups that are very specific to the trauma that they experience as professionals working in the community with active substance use and abuse, right? And so their reality is different, say, regardless of their racial identity, but also the impact on the employee. And so our groups are very specific to the organization for just that reason, because identity and intersectionality becomes such an important factor in service, but also an important factor in employee wellness. And for us, we look at it from the perspective, especially because we work with public health and human services organizations that are even city and or organizations that want to impact those areas. We look at their employees as just as human as those that they serve. And so because of that, the intersectionalities of those identities vary program by program. And so we can't assume that one thing that works for city A will work for a smaller county that may have less people and really have less experience with working with the community. And so really we try to make it specific to the organization. And I'm hoping that I answered that question because I feel like I went off on my own rant because I do that.
No, I think you did. I think you did it beautifully because you tied in not just the identity piece, but also the work experience, which I think can get lost sometimes. And these are not easy jobs, right? They're often underfunded, underappreciated, understaffed,
Absolutely.
under-resourced. Um, but they're also really difficult,
Hmm.
emotionally taxing, physically demanding. There's a lot of workplaces talk about psychological safety, but in a lot of these jobs, there's not even physical safety
Hmm.
because you don't know who's walking through the door, what state they might be in, or when
Absolutely.
you go out into the community, who might be waiting for you when you get there and where their heads might be,
Hmm.
especially if you're dealing with addiction or mental health issues, mental health
Hmm.
crises, that sort of thing. What do you find for you and your staff is needed to help you because you're almost picking up secondary trauma from the people that you're working with, I would
Absolutely.
imagine.
So I like to hope that I get the opportunity to practice what I preach. And so what we've acquired with our staff, we are small in the sense that we are full-time staff is 5 people, and our contracts are related to consultants in their area of expertise, depending on what we're working with. And so we get the honor of being very close knit in the sense that we know and identify the things that we've needed. And part of those things are we have ongoing self-care check-ins, we have game nights as a workplace. And when I say game nights, we have the same game night you might have with a family where it's drinks and fun and laugh and all kinds of things related to just relaxing. But we also do things like we offer EAP, where you have a very specific, and let me change that language for just a second because I want to make sure that it's equitable. We offer an equitable because our staff are identifying with different identities. We allow you to select the organizations that you would want to work with related to therapy, mental health, physical health. So that could be your working out, your going to mental health therapists. We allow you to select from what is considered your community or identity. And so if you want and you're like, oh, I don't mind, anyone can help me, then that's fine. But for some, they specifically want Black therapists, they specifically want a Latinx therapist. My goal is not to tell you how to get help. My goal is to help you get it. And so we offer the opportunity for you to be selective in who you want to be your provider with no judgment. And then we also do movement moments throughout our day because we do work with a bunch of therapists slash social workers. We have a person who does guided meditation on the staff with the staff. We have a person who does a form of yoga that goes into guided meditation. And so we have those things actively happening. And then we just have rest spots because I know what it's like to be at a place of employment and be burnt out to the point where I'm physically sick. I know what that means. Sometimes I can't put words to it. And so we have what are considered self-care moments and days. And so you don't have to justify it or take it out of your time. You just have to use it if you need it. And so we do really good with those things. And we offer supervision and support. I meet with all of my staff because we are small. Again, I know that there's some privilege to what I'm saying, but these are just an example of things you can do. I offer my staff individual meetings each week. And in those meetings, we have an agenda, but part of the main part of that agenda is just being together.
As you were talking about people selecting help that corresponds to the identities that are important to them,
Mhm.
I was thinking about there's such a shortage of mental health professionals in the country. There
Absolutely.
is an extreme shortage of Black mental health professionals in this country. And it is amazing to me that even with a small organization, you are able to help connect folks to those resources.
Mhm.
When I hear people at large companies say, we just can't find anybody.
Mhm.
And what I'm hearing from you is it can be done. There just needs to be some intention behind it.
Absolutely. And the intention is, and this is a word that I'm sure you've used as a consultant, the intention is communication. The intention comes with communicating to your staff what their real needs are, and then allowing yourself the opportunities to go past what is the norm. Okay, so I got an EAP. All right, that EAP may not be set up to have more providers that look different than what is the identified community in that area. I need to extend it. I may need to go a state over and make virtual sessions. And depending on your rules and regulations, let me make sure that I'm clear. Like, but depending on what can be done, you have to find the solution that works for who really you're serving. Because to me, even as an employer, you're serving those who are serving your community and your customer. So when your employee's happy, it's just shown productivity wise, because that's what we are based in terms of capitalism, that you're going to do better. Like when I'm happy, healthy, and whole, then I have a better opportunity to make sure that the things that I'm involved in, I want to be in.
Absolutely. When you work with these organizations, what kind of results do they typically see when they've completed, their initial contract with you and they move into that sort of maintenance phase where you're checking in on them, quarterly, annually?
So I've two things. The main results are invested by leadership and seeing themselves as included in the work. And so when I get the leadership that's included in the work, I see the best outcomes because it becomes also important for them to get the support they need for leadership coaching, supporting very specifically, I do racial equity leadership coaching. And so sometimes that's just my contract and it might not even be an old client. And really what that means is what lens do I have and what extra identities am I missing because I may not be a part of or understand it, right? Or what biases or awareness. So I see the best success when our leaders are invested. So I wanted to just start there. But what that looks like when we do that is that you are willing to do the ongoing assessments, that you're willing to have the difficult conversations, because part of our work is also having, by the time we leave, we talk about restorative justice. By the time we leave, we talk about courageous conversations. By the time we leave organizations, you have the tools. You just have to have the courage to use them and the courage to be vulnerable. And so most of our successful, and I do say this, even our successful organizations that have been with us for 4 or 5 years, it's about re-examining and evaluating according to the times and being open and vulnerable. And then also knowing that you don't know. And so I think those are our main ones. And then the outcomes that matter most to me is always about who we serve. And so when I can see a community shift or a connection to the workers in a different way, or even the workers connected to their work differently, that matters to me. For example, working with a juvenile justice department, I've had the opportunity that work with specifically the younger adolescents. And although we couldn't impact the entire system, we were able to make sure that portion of them were connected to their work again. It could also recognize and identify their burnout. And so that just makes for a better employee, but also makes for a happier impact or a better impact on those they serve. And so I think it really comes down to, I look at success by each place, but I know that the benchmarks that people walk away with is a vulnerability, an understanding of tools that can be beneficial to reassess, and then also knowing that they're not the expert.
I would think that would be very difficult for some of these leaders
Mhm.
because they have built a career on knowing,
Uh-huh.
on being the person who knows. And I'm gonna take a little bit of liberty here and say that and guess that there's a lot of paternalism that's taking place with some of these leaders where they think they are going to come in and be angels and saviors and help all these people and right and be so magnanimous and they know what's right for everyone else.
Mhm.
And I would think because I've seen this a few times myself, being told you don't know what's right for everyone else and you need to listen and you need to ask can be very unnerving and destabilizing for these folks. Has that been your experience?
Absolutely. And I think the reason, and again, being human, and then also being in a society where that literal definition that you use is how you're acculturated to be a leader, right? And then specifically a leader in human service or public health. And so, really, what you're asking people to do is to be vulnerable with what they've been structured to do as they identify success. And so, absolutely, it's met with resistance. It's met with ongoing questioning, which I'm okay with. And because of that, I think it allows for people to see that I'm not going to bend on you needing to bend, right? Because the reality is that although we do want to quote unquote save the world, we can't do that if we don't see the world, if we don't see individuals as just as valuable and dignity based as we would ourselves in terms of wanting to rescue or save, because no one saves another. You support and you collaborate with them, but you don't save. And so I think really helping them to understand that there are some reasons why you have that thinking. And depending on your identity, depending on what made you come into the work, because that's where that trauma informed and trauma focused part comes in. I'm clear that during our leadership coaching, especially because almost all of my assessments have some form of racial equity coaching, but then also other forms of coaching around leadership. And part of those discussion is how are we aware of our biases that are created from our identities? That same struggle comes into the identity of savior. And so where do we get that from? How does it fall? It could be our personal experience. It could be our cultural experience. And we work through those things together. And when there's resistance, I say it out loud. And so I even acknowledge that I told you this may happen. And so part of what's going on is normal. And it's normal to feel like this is shaky, it's not working. It's normal to feel like I can't be successful this way. When I first introduced restorative justice to most people, it's like, how are we even going to have a conversation about justice if we don't have a result and an outcome? And this, wait, let's just hold up and look at what you build while you're doing the restorative justice and see if that could at least lean towards helping and collaborating versus telling and guiding.
Oh my goodness, Sharea, your clients are so lucky to have you, not just to have your help, but to have you alongside them
Absolutely.
and keeping them grounded when they probably feel like
Mhm.
everything is adrift. I am so grateful for you and for the work that you do. How can people find you to learn more about you, to work with you potentially?
So I will make sure to give you some, but my LinkedIn is always a good opportunity to reach out and connect with me, as well as we have a consultation page that is specific to an intake if you're interested in the services. Right now, we do not quote unquote have a opening for a long-term client. However, we do, like I said, touch points or assessments and help you to create your map and your plan. So there might be other opportunities to work with us. Also, we do work with Black women specifically who are in leadership. So that is always opening, where we do coaching as well as supportive services that are related to what it looks like to heal as a Black woman experiencing or navigating racial trauma in corporate America. So it might be opportunities to work with us, and I'll make sure to give you those things. So between LinkedIn and our website, as well as for Black women specifically, we have a series called Healing and Joy.
Wonderful. And I'll make sure to put all of those links in the show notes at includingyoupodcast.com so that folks, if you're driving, don't try to write all that down. Just come to the podcast page and you'll be able to find it there. Sharea, thank you so much for your
Thank you.
time, for your expertise, and for the work that you're doing. I greatly appreciate you.
Thank you for having me, Amy. I appreciate it.
If you've enjoyed this episode, follow Lead at Any Level on LinkedIn and YouTube. Then join us for Including You video simulcast every Thursday at noon Eastern. Including You can also be enjoyed each week as part of the Living Corporate audio podcast series, available on all major podcast platforms. Learn more at living-corporate.com. Including You is brought to you in part by Lead at Any Level, a boutique training and consulting firm improving employee engagement and retention for companies that promote from within. Lead at Any Level. Leaders can be anywhere and should be everywhere. Learn more at leadatanylevel.com. Lead at Any Level and its logo are registered trademarks of Lead at Any Level LLC. The views and opinions of guests on our show do not necessarily reflect the positions of Lead at Any Level, Living Corporate, or the sponsors of Including You.
That's it for this week's episode of Including You. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to leave us a comment or a review to help others find us as well. You'll want to be sure to join me next week when my guest will be me. Zach Nunn of Living Corporate will be interviewing me in celebration of our 100th episode of Including You. So you won't want to miss it. Thank you so much for being a part of this movement. We appreciate you, and we'll see you next week.